Welcome to SDN Tech Networking Podcast, world's first human-curated AI podcast where we break down complex topics into bite-sized, easy-to-digest pieces.
Okay, so get ready to go deep because today we are tackling software-defined segmentation, or SDS for short. You know, like the cool kids call it. We've got a ton of info on this, and to be honest, it's a lot to unpack, so we're here to help you sort through it all.
Yeah, it's kind of like
Mhm.
it's like finally getting to take control of your network in ways that, we could only dream of just a few years ago. Think of it this way, ditching those old rigid ways of doing things and stepping into a world where your network security is as adaptable as like a chameleon.
Oh, yeah, I like that. That's a pretty awesome image. But really, though, why is everyone so obsessed with SDS all of a sudden? It's like VLANs went from zero to hero practically overnight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it. We're living in a hybrid world now, right? Our data is everywhere. It's, scattered across data centers, clouds, who even knows where else anymore, really. And traditional network security just can't keep up with that. So SDS is kind of like it steps in to bridge that gap. It lets you define and control your network traffic, but based on things like who someone actually is, what device they're using, even down to the specific application they're trying to access.
Oh, wow. So it's not just like, hey, you're on the network, come on in anymore. It's more like, hold on a sec, let's see who you are, why you're here, and if you should even be asking for that particular file at 3 a.m.
Exactly. It's about bringing that fine-grained control and that flexibility right to your fingertips, no matter where your data or your users actually are physically located.
Okay, now this whole role-based access control thing within SDS, that's where it got really interesting for me. Are we talking about a future where my job title is literally like my network keycard?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, think about it. Like, imagine you've got a junior marketing person in London, and they need to access some marketing materials, but they're on a server in New York. With role-based access control in an SDS environment, they get access to only what they need. Just those specific files and resources that are actually relevant to their marketing role. Meanwhile, all the sensitive financial data over in finance, that stays completely locked down, even if they're, in the same building.
Wait, so are you saying with SDS, we could actually say goodbye to those never-ending help desk tickets for like basic access requests? Because if so, sign me up, like yesterday.
It's definitely a step towards a more automated and secure approach to access management, for sure. It lets you move away from that whole reactive, oh, someone needs access, everyone scramble mentality, and move towards something that's way more proactive and secure.
That's huge, especially these days with remote teams and global collaboration and everything. But okay, let's talk about another term I kept seeing in the research, zero trust. It sounds kind of intense, to be honest. Like you're always looking over your shoulder on the network,
It might sound kind of extreme, yeah. But it's really just a practical way to think about security, especially with everything going on these days. The main idea is basically never automatically trust anything, inside or outside your network. You verify each and every single access attempt, every single time, as if it's coming from an untrusted source. And that's where SDS and Zero Trust really come together.
Well, really? How so?
Well, SDS gives you the actual tools you need to really put those Zero Trust principles into practice. It lets you define these incredibly specific access controls based on, who the person is, what device they're on, where they are. You can even get into their behavior patterns if you want to get really fancy with it.
So instead of just relying on one big, strong perimeter around everything, you're basically building micro-perimeters around every single user and every single piece of data. It's like, what is it like having a bodyguard for every file on your network?
That's a great way to put it. And the best part is, it lines up perfectly with NIST's Zero Trust framework, which I know you've been digging into.
So we're talking like Fort Knox level security here. But instead of actual walls and guards, it's all, software defined and adaptable.
I gotta say, I'm starting to get why everyone's so excited about SDS.
Oh yeah, it's huge, especially when you see how it all connects back to those NIST guidelines for Zero Trust we were talking about. It's like those guidelines are basically the blueprint, right? For any organization that's serious about boosting their security. And SDS just slots right in, gives them the tools to make it all actually happen. But it's more than just checking boxes on a list. The really cool stuff happens when you start to see how this works in the real world.
Okay, now you're speaking my language. Give me an example. How does this SDS thing play out in reality? All right, let's say you're rolling out a new app, cloud-based, right? For your sales team to use. With SDS, you could create a totally separate virtual network, a VN, just for that app, like building a secure little bubble inside your network, and only the people who should be there, in this case, your sales team, using their work devices. They can get into that specific VN and access the app that's in there.
So even if someone snuck past your main network defenses somehow, they'd hit a wall trying to even touch that sales app.
Okay.
Because they're not allowed in that VIP section, right?
Consider. And the best part is you're managing all these little micro perimeters from a central dashboard. You're not manually configuring every single person or device. You set the policies and they just kind of automatically enforce those zero trust rules.
Okay, that's good to know. I was picturing some poor IT person stuck in a basement somewhere, hand-coding access for every single user. But we've been gushing about SDS for a while now. It can't all be good, right? There's got to be some downsides.
Well, you're not wrong. Like any new tech, there are going to be some bumps in the road, especially when you're just getting it set up. One of the biggest ones is integrating with older systems, legacy systems. Trying to make that work is, well, it's a challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just magically replace your entire network overnight, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, really planning things out and understanding your current setup inside and out, that's crucial.
So dip your toes in the SDS pool before you cannonball in.
Exactly. Start small, maybe a pilot project, a few users, a non-critical app, something like that. That way you can work out the kinks, get comfortable with the tech before you go all in.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Better of a few small hiccups in a test run than accidentally taking your whole network down because you moved too fast. But even with the best planning, things can still go wrong. What happens if something breaks during the deployment?
That's why you absolutely need a rollback plan. Like before you touch anything on your actual network, you got to have a clear, tested way to get back to your old setup, just in case.
So it's like a safety net for your network, in case you need to hit the undo button fast.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see that. This is a lot to handle, though. Who manages all this? Do you need a dedicated SDS expert on your team or something?
It definitely helps to have someone with, deep technical knowledge leading the way. But it's bigger than that. You got to have the right processes and the right tools. We see a lot of people using configuration management tools. They help you track all the changes, automate things, roll back to earlier versions if you need to.
It's like a time machine for your network.
Yeah.
But even with all that, this still feels like a lot for some companies,
Yeah.
Especially if they don't have tons of resources or a huge IT team. What about those companies? What should they do if they like what they're hearing about SDS, but are feeling a little, intimidated by it all?
Well, one option is to bring in outside help. Find a managed security service provider, an MSSP, one that really knows SDS. They can handle a lot of the heavy lifting, the setup, the management, all that. Frees up your team to focus on what they do best.
So it's like hiring expert guides to lead your SDS expedition.
Exactly.
Before we move on, though, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, automation. It seems like that's kind of a big deal for this whole SDS thing.
Absolutely. It's not just a nice extra. It's key to actually getting the benefits of SDS. Remember those manual configuration nightmares we talked about?
Oh, please, I'm trying to forget.
Right. Well, automation helps you say goodbye to all that. No more tedious, error-prone tasks for you or your team.
Music to my ears.
Yeah.
And it's not just about saving time and headaches, though, right? Automation makes things more secure, too, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because it makes sure your policies are being applied consistently across the board. And it cuts way down on the chances of someone messing something up.
Right. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the tech side of things, but let's zoom out for a second. What does all of this actually mean for businesses, practically speaking? Why should they care?
Now that's the million-dollar question, right? At the end of the day, SDS isn't about having the shiniest new tech toy. It's about solving real business problems.
Okay, so give me the business case for SDS then. Why should a company invest the time, the money, the resources, all of it, to make this technology a reality for them? What's the return?
Well, we've touched on some of it already, but let's bring it all together, first and foremost. Security. That's huge. In today's world, it's not about if you'll get attacked, it's when. And SDS helps you minimize the damage. It contains those breaches. It stops attackers from getting around inside your network.
It's like those micro perimeters we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Limiting the damage and protecting your most important stuff.
Exactly. And beyond just the security aspect, SDS can make your operations way more efficient. Remember all those help desk tickets? The manual provisioning tasks?
Don't remind me.
Right. SDS can automate a lot of that, which frees up your IT team to do more important things. Imagine, getting a new employee set up with access in minutes instead of days, or updating your security policies across your entire network. with one click.
Now that is what I'm talking about. Less time putting out fires, more time for the stuff that actually moves the needle.
Right. And then finally, SDS gives you agility, which is crucial in business these days. New apps, new locations, cloud computing, all that. SDS lets you adapt your network on the fly.
So instead of your network holding you back, it actually helps you innovate and grow.
Exactly. And that's where all those best practices we were talking about come in. The planning, the automation, the collaboration, that's how you unlock the full potential of SDS.
This has been incredibly helpful. We went from, like, what even is SDS to, okay, I'm seeing the potential here. It's clearly a really powerful tool, especially for organizations that are serious about security, agility, efficiency. But it's not a magic wand. And it's not a one-and-done kind of thing either, right?
Not at all.
It takes planning, smart decisions, and a willingness to really embrace new ways of doing things.
I couldn't agree more. SDS is a journey, not a destination. And as more companies adopt it, as they get better at using it, we're going to see some really innovative solutions and best practices emerge.
And for anyone listening who's thinking about starting their own SDS journey, what's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Do your research. Really understand what's out there. Figure out your specific needs. And don't be afraid to ask for help along the way.
Love it. Well, on that note, I think it's time to dive into the elephant in the room, the deployment challenges.
Right, because as great as it can be, it's not always easy.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are some of the biggest pain points companies hit when they're trying to deploy SDS? And more importantly, how can they overcome them?
One of the biggest ones, honestly, is legacy integration. Lots of organizations are working with older infrastructure and tools, stuff that wasn't designed with SDS in mind at all. It's like,
How?
it's tricky.
So how do you bridge that gap then between those legacy systems and, the SDS world? There's got to be more to it than just hoping for the best, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It takes some real strategy. One thing that came up a lot and what we looked at was before you even think about installing that new SDS solution, you got to really assess your existing setup, like deep dive into it.
So know your network inside and out.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But what happens when you find those things, the things that just won't work with SDS? Do you just have to give up on those older systems?
Not necessarily. A lot of the SDS vendors out there, they actually offer like integration tools and APIs specifically to help connect with older equipment.
Oh, okay.
It might take a little extra work, a little customization, but you can usually find a way to make it work.
So it's like finding a translator, basically, to help those old systems speak the language of SDS.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
But even if you get past the legacy stuff,
Mhm.
it still sounds like a pretty complicated process, this deployment. What other, potential problems should people be aware of?
Well, one thing that came up a few times was the possibility of network outages during the deployment. Especially if it's not done super carefully. It's kind of like, performing open heart surgery while the patient is still awake. One wrong move, and things could go bad really fast.
Yikes. Okay. That's a scary thought. How do you avoid that? What's the secret to a smooth deployment?
I wish there was a simple answer, like a magic spell or something. But the biggest thing is staged deployments. Don't try to switch everything over to SDS at once. Go gradually. Start with a small pilot, like we talked about, then slowly roll it out to different parts of your network, and watch for any issues along the way.
So slow and steady wins the race.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But realistically speaking, even with the best plans, sometimes things just go wrong. So what happens then? What's the recovery plan if things go sideways during deployment?
That's why you always have a rollback plan. Before you change anything on your live network, you need a clear, tested way to get back to how things were before, just in case.
Like an emergency reset button. Okay, that makes me feel a little better. But who manages all of this? It's a lot to keep track of.
You're right, it is. Having someone who really knows their stuff, technically, that's definitely a huge help. But you also need good processes and tools in place. We see a lot of organizations using configuration management tools. Those can help you track changes, automate tasks, roll back if you need to.
That's super helpful. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the technical details to the business benefits, even the potential challenges and how to overcome them. I feel like I have a much better grasp on this whole SDS thing now.
Me too.
It's clear that SDS has the potential to really change the game for network security.
Absolutely.
But it's not a magic solution. It takes careful planning, smart decisions, and a willingness to adapt.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So for anyone listening out there who's thinking about taking the plunge with SDS, what's the one piece of advice you'd leave them with?
Don't be afraid to get started, but do your homework. Understand the ins and outs before you dive in head first.
Love it. Well, on that note, I think that's a wrap for us today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into software-defined segmentation. It's been an adventure. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay secure.